Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Parsha class. This week we will focus on the Torah portion of Vayeira, and we will go right to the very beginning of the Parsha and share some, hopefully, fascinating ideas connected to the opening episode of what is a Parsha that's full of fascinating ideas. We have the Vayeira, the angels coming to Avram. We have the angels then visiting Lot. We have the destruction of Sodom. We have the unique relationship between the relations, I should say, of Lot and his daughters. And then we have the binding of Isaac, the Akedah at the end of the Parsha. Many fascinating ideas to focus on, but may as well start from the beginning. So let's go through basic Chumash Rashi and then delve into the beyond. Torah portion begins, Vayeira Ilav Hashem. The text in front of you, recently Chabad.org changed their arrangement so that they have the bold, which is the translation of the words, and then there's the non-bold, which is the inserted commentary. So Vayeira Ilav Hashem, and God appeared to Avraham be'elonei Mamre, in Elonim, the plains of Mamre. Avram is sitting at the entrance to the tent, looking out for travelers to host, but God had made the heat of the day unnaturally intense. Says Rashi, Vayeira Elav. So the pasuk doesn't seem to indicate what the purpose of this visit is at all, which is something which is unique, and maybe we'll come back to that. The fact that the Torah doesn't tell us the purpose of this visit. And that's where Rashi fills in and says, Vayeira Elav, levaker es hacholim, to visit the sick. We'll see if we have time. We'll get to a little bit more about this mitzvah of bikur cholim. Those of you who also to take the Thursday night Talmud class, tomorrow's Talmud class will be all about this mitzvah, the Talmud related to this mitzvah. But either way, he came to visit the sick, and Reb Chama adds to that, Reb Chama bar Chanina, Yom Shlishi Lemilasei Haya, it was the third day after circumcision, which is the most painful day, Uba Kadosh Baruch Hu v'sha'al v'shleima, and God came to ask about his well-being. So, it's interesting, just to I want to point out a couple things. Firstly, this idea that the third day is the most painful day after Bris Milah. So, a moel told me, the moel who circumcised my sons, told me that from today's medical establishment, or today's medical knowledge, does not support this. It doesn't support that the third day is the most painful. Well, obviously, I guess we have limited knowledge, at least when it comes to a baby, we have limited knowledge. But he gave a theory. His theory was, this is Rabbi Cohen, who says his theory is that today we are very familiar with, and therefore take a lot of precaution to avoid the injury becoming infected. Today we are very familiar with the concern of infection. Therefore, you have the antibiotic. You have all sorts of things you do to avoid infection. He says the olden days they weren't aware of infection, and therefore the assumption, he says, is that an injury, especially an open wound, became infected. And if a wound becomes infected, the infection is strongest on the third day before it begins to heal. So that was a theory he posited. True or not, I don't know, but that's an interesting theory. The second point I want to point out over here is that it says, Ubaha Kadosh Baruch Hu v'sha'al b'shloima, and God came and asked for his well-being. And the reason why that's unique is because when it comes to a human being who visits another human being, so then yes, part of the goal of visiting is to see how is my friend doing. But with God, that can't be the reason, because God knows how a person is doing. So God wasn't asking Avraham, how are you doing, so that God would know how Avraham was doing, because God knew that, but rather just to ask, to show concern, which tells you, even if you know how the person is doing, it's appropriate to ask, how are you doing? Especially if someone is going through a hard time. Ve'eloi Mamre, So why is that significant? So Rashi tells us because Mamre was the one who advised him to do the Milah. Avram had several friends who he consulted with, and they didn't all support this idea of doing a bris milah, but Mamre did. And that's why he receives acknowledgement over here. The Torah says that he's the one who, it was in his area that God showed himself to Avram. I saw earlier today that one can ask, the Maharal asks the following question. And he quotes other Mefarshim who asked this question. Why is Avram consulting with anyone? Why is Avram consulting? God says to do the circumcision. Avram is a loyal servant of Hashem. So then why is Avram consulting anyone? And again, some Mamre supported it. His other friends didn't necessarily support it. And the Maharal answers a very practical bit of advice. And that is that sometimes even if you know what you're going to do, it's appropriate to talk it over with friends. Talk it over with friends. Avram never considered not following Hashem's will, but he figured, let me talk it over with friends and get their support, and then I'll do it. And Mamre gave him support, and even though others didn't, he went ahead and did it because that was always his plan. So that's the Melody Mamre. Continuing in the Rashi, Yoshev, he was sitting. Why is that relevant? Says Rashi, Yoshev is written without a vav because he wanted to stand. Amar le HaKadosh Baruch Hu shei v'aniyem, and I want you to sit and I will stand. And this is the he says this symbolizes something in the future, that it says God stands in the presence of a Jewish court of judges, a proper Jewish court of judges. Pesach ha'oil, basically what's beautiful, sometimes we go through Rashi and we kind of just zip through it. But if you pause in a moment, you see Rashi is taking a pasuk, which if you just read on its own, says one thing. And Rashi says every word over here contains a message, a lesson, a story. You read it, all right, he was sitting in Pesach ha'oil, fine. No, the reason why it says Pesach ha'oil, says Rashi, lirosim yashav v'shav, to see if there was anyone at the tent, anybody passing that he can invite into his home. Avram and Sarah represent an open home. Even as Avram is in the third day in pain of circumcision, he's looking for passerbys to invite into his home. Why were there no passerbys that day? The next Rashi clarifies. The heat of the day, that God took the sun out of its sheath in order not to bother Avraham with travelers. But when he saw that Avraham was upset, he thought he was doing Avraham a favor. And it turns out Avraham was upset there's no travelers. Therefore, he brought the Malachim who came to him in the form of human beings. Okay, any questions on Pasuk Aleph? Anything? No, everything's squared away. Okay, then let's move on to Pasuk Beis. And here's where I want to at least spend the first, if not the entire discussion, but the first portion of our discussion. Pasuk Beis. Vayisa eina vayar. Avram raises his eyes and sees. V'hinei shloisha anashim. And behold, 3 men, nitzavim alav, were standing before him. Vayar, he noticed them. Vayaratz likrasam, he ran towards them. Mi pesach ha'oil, from the entrance to the tent. Vayishtachu arza, and he bowed toward them. What does this pasuk tell us? Again, you read it, it says one basic idea, you look into the commentaries, and there is a wealth of discussion on this pasuk. There are 3 people. Why 3? Why 3 people? Echad levaser Sarah. One came to inform Sarah that she was going to have a child. Ve'echad lahapar chasedoim, and one came to turn over the city of stone. Ve'echad lerapois es Avraham, and one came to heal Avraham. Why 3? She'ein malach echad oisa shtei shlichus. Because a single angel cannot do 2 shlichus. In today's vernacular, angels cannot multitask. Why not? So here you have the fact that they cannot multitask tells us about what they are. And that is an angel, by definition, has no individual identity. The definition of an angel is an entity that carries out a divine mission. That is what makes it. That's its entire existence. So therefore, one angel can't do 2 missions, because an angel doing 2 missions suggests a being which is able to do 2 different things. But if the being's entire existence is that which it carries out, so then this carrying out of a mission is the angel, cannot do 2. Again, it's a somewhat of an abstract idea, but if you think about it, it makes sense. If the definition of its existence is its mission, so then yeah, a mission equals an angel. If there's a new mission, that means it's a new angel. Teidalacha, to clarify, to prove this point, take notice. He says, "Shekin kol Parsha maskirim l'shon Rambam." Generally, in the Torah portion, they are referred to in plural. They ate. He spoke to them. They spoke to him. But when it comes to the Vayeira, when it comes to the notification, the good news, it says, "And he, individual, the angel, shared that information with Sarah." When it comes to overturning Sodom, it says, "I cannot do something." Fine. So you have this idea that these angels cannot do 2 missions. One angel does a single mission. They work together, though. The Maharal, in his commentary over here, asks the following question. He says, why were all 3 angels necessary at this stop? At this point, you would only need 2 angels, which is one to heal Avraham and one to notify Sarah of the birth of their son Yitzchak. Why does this angel that was necessary to destroy Sodom, why was it necessary here? We think kind of simply, well, because may as well, if they're coming together, may as well join them. That's not how it works. If an angel is only there on a mission for God, so then I'm sorry, it's not Maharal, it's from Arizal. So then why is that the angel there to overturn Sodom? What's he doing here? He's out of place. Let him join later. And Arizal, obviously, the Arizal is synonymous to Kabbalah, shares a Kabbalistic idea here. He says the truth is the destruction of Sodom, the birth of Yitzchak, these are all part of, there's a singular purpose over here. And it's one that you would completely miss if you just read through the Parsha. And that is that over here we have the beginning of the birth of Mashiach. He says there's a divine process playing itself out over here, which culminates in the birth of Mashiach. The birth of Mashiach comes from where? So there's 2 sources of Mashiach, right? Over here, both episodes over here lead to the birth of Mashiach. You have the episode of the birth of Yitzchak. Yitzchak, certainly Mashiach is destined from Yitzchak through Yaakov, through Yehuda. But the other source of Mashiach is through Lot. Lot, who has an incestuous relationship with his daughter, that leads to Moab. Moab is the ancestor of Ruth. Ruth is the ancestor of King David, an ancestor of Mashiach. And he says, Kabbalistically, Mashiach comes from both realities. The more, what we call the simpler path, the path of holiness of Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Yehuda. But Mashiach also, because of the powerful light, powerful divine energy that Mashiach, that is necessary, there also has to be a process that is unusual. It has to be extracted. You have this idea of extracting the holiness from an impure source. It says this both about that Rivka had to be extracted from the home of Lavan and Besuah, which will come next week's Torah portion. And then, so to here, the light of Mashiach has to be extracted from Sodom, is within the clutches of darkness. And therefore, the destruction of Sodom, which led to Lot, and it says the Arizal says the light of Mashiach was extracted from Sodom through Lot, and then through his sinful relations with his daughter, that too was part of the birth of Mashiach. It says when you see it that way, the three angels are together because there's a singular mission, which is to bring the light of Mashiach to the world. Very, very profound idea. But I want to focus on something else, which is what I kind of alluded to in the text preview of this class. I want to talk a little bit about who are these Shlosha Anashim? Who are these three people? So I want to read from the Ramban, Nachmonides. And the Ramban, in his commentary over here, takes on the opinion of Rambam. Anyways, David, go ahead. You have a question, please.
Sorry, Rabbi. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay. But the question was like, for some reason, I was studying it says that one of the like Hashem himself came to speak with Abraham himself. One of the angels is Hashem himself.
Now, one of the three angels is Hashem?
Yes, Hashem himself.
I don't know. Let me share the opinion of the Rambam, and maybe that's what you're referring to. I've never heard this idea that God is one of the angels, but I heard that the idea is that there's that the three angels are all the vision of God. Let's share the following thing, and maybe that's what you're referring to. Okay, so what we have over here is as follows. The Ramban, in his commentary on this pasuk, says like this. First, he quotes Rashi, and then he quotes the opinion of the Rambam, Maimonides, whose opinion is mentioned in Moira Nevuchim, which is translated in English as the Guide to the Perplexed. And he's quoting over here the Rambam's opinion, but it's not just his opinion on this pasuk. It's the Rambam's opinion on the topic of angels altogether. As we're going to see over here, there is a major disagreement between the Rambam and the Ramban on the topic of angels. There's several disagreements in how they see the topic of angels. Here's how the Rambam understands this pasuk in this episode. Says the Rambam, a very unique approach. And his approach actually answers what seems to be something which is unusual in the pasuk. I'm going to hide Rashi's commentary for a moment. So here you have Vayeira Elav Hashem, and Hashem appeared to him, Avraham, in the heat of the day. And then it says Avraham looked up, and there were three people standing toward him. What is this vision? Like, if you read it, there seems to be a problem here, which is we don't find any sort of communication between God and Avraham. In any other situation in the Torah where God reveals himself to an individual, then there's a statement, there's a conversation, and God sends a message. God reveals himself to Moshe Rabbeinu in the burning bush, and then they have a conversation. Generally speaking, a revelation of God comes with a mission, with a conversation, with a goal. Over here, there's no conversation, there's no goal. It seems to just immediately move on to something else. Says the Rambam that the following pasuk, Vayisa Elav, Vayisa Ina Vayar, that he looks up and he sees the three people, is the clarification of Vayeira Elav Hashem. The vision that God shows is the following episode. Now, Rashi and others don't understand it that way, and generally speaking, when we read the story, when we teach a story, we don't explain it that way. It's almost like there's two separate things. There's a vision of God, as Rashi says, Bikur Cholim, and then the next thing that happens is that he looks up and he sees people. The Rambam says no. The vision of the three people is the Vayeira Elav Hashem. That is the appearance of God to Avram, is the three people. Is everything that transpires afterwards is all part of Vayeira Elav Hashem. Is the image, is the vision and the appearance of God to Avram. So, David, what you said earlier about God being one of the angels, this says God's not one of the angels. All three angels are just the vision of God to Avraham. And basically, what the Rambam is saying is that the entire episode of the angels is just a vision of God to Avraham. It's like a dream. There weren't, in actuality, three angels present. or three people present, it was all a maret, it was all a vision. And this is the Rambam's approach, and it's a radical approach. You can argue it's a more data-based approach or scientific-based approach, in which he says that whenever the Torah talks about the presence of angels, there is no physical presence. It is a vision. It is a spiritual vision of the one who is seeing it. He says that about this. He says that about the interaction of Yaakov and the angel in the middle of the night who he battles. Rambam says that there is no such thing as an angel manifested in physical reality. That's the Rambam's approach in Moreh Nevuchim. The Ramban on this parsha quotes that and very seriously challenges that. And he poses questions. He says, if that's the case, then every part of the story that happens next never happened. He says that basically means, if this is all Avraham's vision, so that means Avraham never took bread to feed them. Avraham never went and Sarah did not prepare. This never happened. There was no real bread. There was no real cattle in verse number 7. There was no cream and milk in verse number 8. Furthermore, verse number 12 couldn't have happened. Sarah laughing didn't happen because this is all part of a vision of Abraham. If I have a dream and in my dream someone else laughs, that person didn't laugh. It's all part of my dream. It's all part of my vision. In essence, the Rambam saying this whole thing was a dream. This whole thing was a vision. So then everything that takes place here, nothing physically happens. This is all a mara. And then the Ramban says, it's extremely difficult to understand this episode of the Torah that way. And then he says, let's take it further. These same angels now go to Lot. That also never happened. They didn't go to Lot. There was no actual visit of Lot, which means, or maybe Lot also was clued into this vision. Was Lot now part of the? So now Lot has a vision of these angels. But the problem is, you have all the people of Sodom surrounding the house, and they're looking. What are they looking at? They don't see anything. It's all part of the vision of Lot. So it's hard to imagine. It says the whole Rambam's approach radically changes the understanding of this whole Torah portion. The Ramban says further. The Ramban says further. He says if we go a little bit ahead into the Torah portion of Yaakov, Yaakov is battling the angels. Yaakov is battling the angel. So again, Rambam says that it's all just an image. That's a vision. That's not an actual. There wasn't an actual battle that took place. So Rambam says, okay, it's an image. The problem with that is, it says the next morning, as he emerges victorious over that angelic being, what does the Torah say? V'hu tzolea al yirecha. He was limping because he was struck by the angel. Why would you be limping if it's all a spiritual vision? I was studying this with a psychiatrist, and he says sometimes you can have a dream or imagination that's so real that you actually feel the physical repercussion of that vision that you had or the dream that you had. You had a dream that someone hit you in the head, and you could wake up with a headache or with pain in the head because it feels so much of pain today is psychological. Therefore, it could be so real in your mind that you could feel physical response to a vision, to a psychological experience. But again, it's very difficult, says the Ramban, to look at Torah that way. And therefore, he concludes with a pretty strong terminology in which he says, Ve'elu dvarim, soisrim akasa. This opinion, he says, of the Rambam seems to contradict the pasuk, the simple meaning of the Torah. Also, l'shaimam, says you're not allowed to listen to it. Afki lahamin lahem. Certainly, you can't believe it. It's very harsh words, and I certainly can't come between the Rambam and the Ramban. Now, Ramban lived 100 years after Rambam, so Rambam didn't have the ability to defend himself. Although I'm sure there are those who defend his opinion and answer the Ramban's questions. But either way, that's the Rambam. Now, the Rambam, for those who've familiar with this topic, I actually gave a course last year on supernatural ideas within Judaism. What does Judaism relate to dreams and to curses and to blessings and astrology and to angels? And a common thread is that the Rambam has a much more pragmatic, scientific approach to these topics. Furthermore, there are those who point out that the Rambam in the book Moreh Nevuchim, in the book of Guide to the Perplexed, is talking to a philosophical student. The Rambam clearly says the Moreh Nevuchim is not for everyone. The Guide to the Perplexed is to a student who is immersed in philosophy at the time, which was prominent in the Arab kingdom, and therefore has questions, and they're trying to reconcile both worlds. The Rambam says this. I'm talking to someone who's trying to reconcile the world of philosophy with the world of Torah, and how can I bring them together? And those who suggest that the answers and the explanations the Rambam gives in Moreh Nevuchim may be somewhat tailored to that student, may not be the answer the Rambam would give to everyone. I'm not saying that's the point over here, but I'm saying that's something to keep in mind. Be that as it may, the Ramban categorically rejects the Rambam's approach to angels, and specifically the Rambam's approach to this story of angels. So how does the Ramban discuss the topic of angels? So the Ramban, Nachmonides, after discussing the topic of angels for a while, gives the following conclusion. He says like this. I'll read from his words, I'll translate. The sages taught us to teach us, to clarify to us. Throughout the Torah, throughout the Tanakh, when we come across the idea of seeing an angel, it's not the level of prophecy. He says we have certain people who are called prophets. The fact that someone sees an angel throughout the Tanakh does not put them on the level of prophecy. One of the proofs, he says, Hagar. Hagar has a conversation with an angel, and Hagar is not considered to be one of the prophetesses. We have 7 prophetesses. Hagar is not one of them. So seeing an angel doesn't mean that person is a prophet. But rather, it's a vision. It is a vision. So he says, generally speaking, throughout the Torah, to some degree, he's agreeing with the Rambam here. Throughout the Torah, when you come across seeing an angel, there isn't a physical angel present. It is a vision. It is in one's mind. It is something that a person is a spiritual vision. He says that's the story with Bilam. That's the story with Elisha. That's the story with Daniel. However, says the Ramban, whenever the Torah refers to an angel with the term anoshim, which means being humans, anoshim, when it uses the word anoshim, like it says over here in the beginning of this portion, and like it says by Lot, and like it says by Yaakov Avinu, that midnight struggle, Vayeira ish ima. So too it says an angel, Vayimtzaeu ish, who finds Yosef as he's trying to find his brothers. Whenever the term is used, anoshim, people, then it means that the angel, which is typically in the spiritual realm, was given a set of clothing. He uses term clothing. And that clothing allows the angel to be seen and experienced in a physical manifestation on this earth. So again, he's not arguing with the Ramban in all areas. He agrees with the Rambam, that is, that many times an angel is just a vision of the one who's experiencing that vision. But when it says anoshim, when it describes them as a human, that means that the angel was given a human characteristic. Despite this, the Ramban says it's a mistake to then assume that these are physical human beings. The fact of the matter is that it says they were pretending to eat, not eating, which means they didn't have the capacity to eat. And therefore, he concludes his commentary over here by saying, "V'loi uchal lefarish." More than that, I can't explain, or more than that, I'm not allowed to explain. So he leaves a lot that is unknown. But one thing he says is that in these situations, when it talks of them and describes them as anoshim, it means a physical manifestation that they were actually seen, and that explains this story. That answers all the questions he said. Yes, Avraham prepared food for them, as did Sarah, and Sarah heard and she laughed because there was a physical manifestation of the angels on earth, which is not typically the case when there is an angel, even according to Ramban. That also explains Yaakov being injured, because again, there was a physical manifestation of that angel, which injured Yaakov. All this is the commentary of the Rambam and the Ramban on this topic. But I want to conclude going back to the beginning of this point. So that's somewhat of an intellectual discussion of what exactly an angel is, but let me conclude with something a little bit more motivational. And that is that the Rebbe shares this story and says sometimes you read a story in the Torah and you can forget some of the most obvious messages. So if you read the story, you have Avraham and Sarah and Achnasas Archim, and you have the angels coming and the miraculous nature of promising Avraham and Sarah, even though they're 99 and 89 respectively, they're going to have a child, and Sarah's laughter. He says, but there's a very basic message and lesson that this section of the Torah is teaching us. And that is that Avraham, at this point, is 99 years old. He had a bris 3 days beforehand. If there ever was a circumstance in which a person had the right to say, I need some time off, it's a 99-year-old man who just had a bris. And a 99-year-old man who spent the last, 60 years spreading monotheism successfully, changing people one at a time, creating a generation of believers. And nonetheless, despite having every reason and excuse to take some time for themselves, Avraham is sitting at the doorstep of his tent, at the opening of his tent, looking for more opportunities of kindness and of influence of Hashem in Hashem's ways. That's what the Rebbe says. That even here, the third day of his Milah, he's looking outside to see maybe there is someone who is hungry, I can feed and I can give to drink, and I could then teach them how to bless Hashem after a meal. And obviously Avraham sensed the heat of the day. Another reason, because it's super hot outside. No one's passing today. But no, he stayed there because maybe someone will pass. And this is the lesson of Avodas Hashem, that even if someone already has accomplished more than they need to accomplish, has accomplished a tremendous amount in their bringing people closer, in their kindness, in their hospitality, and they've already seen the fruit of their labor, and many Jews have been influenced positively by them, a person should never stop and say, okay, the time has come to take it easy. There is no such time. As long as I'm here, and as long as there may be someone who I can bring closer, then that's what I need to do. To add to this one final layer, it says that Hashem visits Avraham. If there was ever a reason to say, okay, I'm going to close shop to others because I've got an important visitor, it's right now. God is visiting. And even as God visits, Avraham is still looking out to see maybe there's another person who I can bring closer. Maybe there's another person who I can feed. Maybe there's another person I can take care of. And this is the profound, the most profound, one of the profound messages to take away from this the setting. Look at the context before we get into the conversations and what the angels say, what they don't say. The context, the setting that our Parsha opens with is a powerful lesson to each and every one of us in how we have to live our lives, constantly looking for the next opportunity to influence another, to help another, physically, spiritually, or both. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I look forward to continuing our studies next Wednesday, God willing.